997 million euros. The largest semiconductor antitrust fine in European history. 7 years of investigation, and the company that got fined? They walked away without paying a single cent, because the people who caught them held secret meetings and forgot to take notes. This is the story of how Qualcomm bribed its way to a monopoly, crushed a startup that dared to compete, and then beat the EU at its own game. In 2011, Qualcomm was untouchable. They controlled roughly 60% of the global market for baseband chipsets, the components inside every phone that connect you to a cellular network. Without Qualcomm, most smartphones were expensive paperweights. They had spent decades building this position through patents, research, and sheer manufacturing scale. Every major phone manufacturer depended on them. The stock market rewarded them generously. Industry analysts treated their dominance as a permanent fact of nature, not something any competitor could realistically challenge. Qualcomm's public image was built on one idea: they were simply better at making chips than everyone else. Their CEO Steve Mollenkopf talked about innovation and R&D investment. Their marketing emphasized technological leadership. The message was clear: Qualcomm earned their position through superior engineering. But what they were doing behind closed doors told a very different story. That same year, Qualcomm signed an agreement with Apple worth billions of dollars. The terms were straightforward. Qualcomm would pay Apple massive incentive payments, reportedly between $2 and $3 billion over 5 years. The single condition: Apple would use only Qualcomm's LTE baseband chips in every iPhone and iPad, every model, every generation, from February 2011 through September 2016. If Apple ever launched a device with a competitor's chip, the payments stopped immediately, and Apple would have to return a large portion of what they had already received. A financial punishment for daring to consider an alternative. But this wasn't a discount. It was a trap designed to make switching impossible. Apple's chief operating officer Jeff Williams later testified about the arrangement. His exact words: "We were staring at an increase of over $1 billion per year in licensing, so we had a gun to our head." Apple took the deal. And for 5 years and 6 months, Intel, MediaTek, and every other chipmaker on the planet were locked out of the most profitable smartphone supply chain in existence. Not because their technology was inferior, because Qualcomm made it financially catastrophic for Apple to even test an alternative. But the lockout was even worse than it sounds. Apple accounted for roughly 1/3 of global LTE chipset demand during this period. One customer, 1/3 of the entire market. By locking Apple into exclusivity, Qualcomm didn't just block competitors from one contract, they blocked them from the single largest revenue opportunity in the entire semiconductor industry. Intel had chips ready: the XMM7160, the XMM7260, real products with competitive specifications. They couldn't sell them to the one buyer that mattered most. And here's the detail that makes the whole arrangement obvious. The moment the exclusivity agreement expired in late 2016, Apple immediately started buying chips from Intel. Immediately. That tells you everything about whether the arrangement was about superior technology or financial coercion. But Qualcomm had a second scheme running simultaneously. And this one targeted a company that couldn't fight back. A small startup out of Bristol, England called Icera was designing baseband processors that matched or outperformed Qualcomm's offerings at lower prices. They had fewer than 300 employees working out of modest offices. They were winning contracts with Huawei and ZTE, two of the biggest phone manufacturers in the world. Their technology delivered faster data speeds at competitive cost. For Qualcomm, this wasn't just competition. This was an existential threat to their entire pricing structure. If a startup with 300 people could match their chips, the premium they charged every manufacturer on Earth would collapse. But instead of competing on innovation, Qualcomm chose targeted destruction. Internal emails from this period show executives writing, quote, "We should not give Icera any opportunity in Huawei strategically." Another email was even more blunt. 2 words: crush Icera at ZTE. That wasn't metaphorical. Qualcomm began selling 3 specific chipsets to Huawei and ZTE at prices below their own manufacturing cost. They didn't drop prices for everyone. They dropped them only for the 2 customers where Icera was gaining traction. The European Commission later found that 1 chipset was sold below average variable cost and 2 others below long-run average incremental cost. In plain language, Qualcomm was losing money on purpose, deliberately, because destroying a competitor was worth more than short-term profit. The Commission described the strategy as maximizing the negative impact on Icera's business while minimizing the effect on Qualcomm's own overall revenue. Surgical financial destruction dressed up as competitive pricing. But the damage to Icera was already fatal. In 2011, Nvidia acquired the startup for $367 million. Jensen Huang thought he was buying a competitive modem business he could integrate with Nvidia's processors. What he actually bought was a company that Qualcomm had already mortally wounded. Icera couldn't grow because Qualcomm was underselling them at the only two customers that mattered. 4 years later, in 2015, Nvidia shut Icera down entirely. $367 million for a company that was already dead when they bought it. But someone had been trying to sound the alarm. Icera CEO Stan Boland filed a formal antitrust complaint with the European Commission on June 30, 2009. He saw exactly what was happening. His company was being strangled by below-cost pricing at the only two customers that could give them the scale to survive. Without volume from Huawei and ZTE, Icera couldn't build the reputation necessary to challenge Qualcomm anywhere else. That was precisely the point of the strategy. If you're watching a company get caught rigging the market from two different angles simultaneously and enjoying every detail, hit subscribe. I cover a new corporate disaster like this every week. But the Commission moved slowly. They opened a predatory pricing investigation in 2010 and the exclusivity investigation in 2015. On January 24, 2018, Commissioner Margrethe Vestager stood at a podium in the Berlaymont building in Brussels and announced the verdict. 997 million euros. The largest semiconductor antitrust fine ever imposed. Her words: Qualcomm paid billions of US dollars to a key customer, Apple, so that it would not buy from rivals. These payments were not just reductions in price. They were made on the condition that Apple would exclusively use Qualcomm's baseband chipsets in all its iPhones and iPads. But Vestager wasn't finished. In July 2019, a second fine landed. 242 million euros for the predatory pricing scheme against Icera. Nearly 1.24 billion euros in combined fines. Qualcomm's general counsel Don Rosenberg called the Commission's theory without precedent and inconsistent. He claimed Icera exited the market for reasons completely unrelated to Qualcomm's pricing. The internal emails saying "crush Icera" apparently meant something else entirely. But here's where this story takes a turn nobody saw coming. While building the 997 million euro exclusivity case over 7 years, the Commission held 7 secret meetings with 6 different third parties, companies and individuals who provided evidence or testimony. They never told Qualcomm about any of these meetings. They never recorded what was discussed. They never gave Qualcomm access to whatever evidence or allegations those meetings produced. But the court noticed everything. On June 15, 2022, the EU General Court annulled the entire 997 million euro fine. Not because Qualcomm was innocent. The court explicitly did not rule on whether the exclusivity deal broke competition law. They annulled it because the Commission broke its own procedural rules. The judgment cited multiple failures to observe due process. The Commission had also changed its theory of harm mid-investigation without letting Qualcomm respond to the new allegations. 7 years of work, 997 million euros, wiped out because the investigators couldn't follow their own procedures. But it gets worse for the Commission. The EU was ordered to pay Qualcomm's legal fees, 785,857 euros, for losing a case they should have won. The Commission decided not to appeal. They just let the largest semiconductor fine in history evaporate. The predatory pricing fine survived though. In September 2024, the General Court upheld it at 238.7 million euros. Qualcomm has appealed to the Court of Justice. That case is still pending. So the final scorecard reads like this. Qualcomm paid Apple billions to lock out every competitor for 5 years. They priced chips below cost to destroy a startup that dared to challenge them. They got caught on both counts. They got fined nearly 1.24 billion euros combined, and on the biggest fine, they paid absolutely nothing. The company that wrote "Crush Icera" in an internal email walked away from 997 million euros because the Commission held secret meetings and couldn't follow its own rules. Qualcomm still dominates the baseband chip market today. Icera no longer exists. The next company I'm covering also thought they were untouchable. Their fine was even bigger and their excuse was even dumber.